and the house began to shake, and next thing I knew, we were being carried through the air.
This was absolute the worst one I've ever seen. I mean, it just sounded like 100 trains coming through there, and you couldn't hear nothing but the trees breaking.
It's almost like a nuclear weapon, hit an area.
I feel just like it's part of me gone.
It's going to have to pick up the pieces and start all over again.
Friends that we've known our whole entire lives have been took away from us.
April's Fury. 5 years later, a WAAY 31 hometown-focused special event brought to you by Current Electrical and Generator Services.
April 27th, 2011 is a hard day to put into words. For many people, it is still fresh on their minds and hard to believe that just 5 years ago on this day, historic and deadly tornadoes ripped through our state. Thank you very much for joining us on this special report. I'm Chief Meteorologist Chris Smith. The rest of the Storm Force 31 weather team will join me later on in the show. During this rare and violent weather event, WAAY 31 was on the front lines getting you life-saving information. We let those who are here on this day look back on the tragedy, aftermath, and recovery.
That day I went from knowing no one who had ever lost their house in a tornado to knowing 6 people who lost everything in one day. The morning tornadoes were a complete surprise. They were a complete surprise to our weather staff, to the National Weather Service weather staff.
And I remember talking to one of the forecasters there, and I said, hey, will the earlier storms, will they affect kind of the forecast for the afternoon or your expectations? And to make a long story short, the answer was no, it's going to be really bad in the afternoon.
Plan to seek shelter, plan to get in shelter, plan to stay in shelter until the storm threat from this entire storm system has passed. When we started seeing those supercells pop up in the just afternoon, and we're seeing the structure of the storms, and all these individual perfectly tornadic looking signature storms are popping up, that's when we knew this is, we're going to be in this for several more hours. When Phil Campbell was hit, or Hackleburg first, then Phil Campbell, the National Weather Service said there was no word out of those communities. It was quiet. If there's a weather event happening and a community goes quiet, dead quiet, it doesn't mean nothing's happening. It means the worst has happened.
Right now on the phone is meteorologist Gary Dobbs. Gary, you're in Mount Hope. You need to seek shelter.
He wanted to be that person that was able to verify, here's a tornado. I see it.
Oh, I see the rotation now. Wait a minute, I'm getting there. If I had to judge what this is, it looks like an F4, and I am going to have to go inside.
Gary Dobbs right now seeking shelter in his storm shelter right now.
You can hear the wind picking up. It has picked up, and it is, well, I got to go inside, okay?
Gary Dobbs heading into a storm shelter, and his cell phone just cut off there.
You know, your heart and your stomach just sinks. It was terrifying. What in the world is happening, Gary? It gives me goosebumps thinking about it now.
I had to literally climb out of the debris when it was over. I was trapped in it for a little while.
He was being a public servant, frankly, and his public service, frankly, nearly got him killed.
Power is cut to hundreds of thousands, potentially, of people in North Alabama.
The electrical grid failed. No one could see us. Every storm siren went silent, every one of them. At that moment, you realized every word that you would say from that point forth was going to be seen by virtually nobody. Reports were coming in that there were deaths, lots of deaths, lots of deaths.
They weren't even able to keep up with the body count because they were finding parts.
People can really do amazing things when they come together.
People you don't even know that stop to see what they can do.
We need to help them as much as we can.
Tragedies like this, It's nice to see the good that can come out of something so devastating.
The community here in the Tennessee Valley always steps up.
April 27, 2011 will be a day that I will never forget, and I think our community will never forget. But I think that we've learned a lot of lessons, and 5 years later, we are better prepared going forward.
Many of you remember it was several days before full power was restored to the Tennessee Valley. Gas was also hard to come by. Drivers waited in long lines just to get a few gallons in the days following the outbreak. Same for grocery stores, where people had to deal with food spoiling without any power. Most of you likely only had to deal with these short-lived problems. However, thousands of people all across Alabama had a long road of recovery ahead of them, losing their homes and businesses. 5 years later, you can still see the scars left behind these violent tornadoes. Meteorologist Will Harkins spoke with families about what they've learned after April 27th.
But I came to the front door and looked the direction the tornado was coming from, and it was blackened.
The ground was shaking, and you know, the dirt was flying in on top of them, and they're underground. They're in a storm shelter, and you know, it broke the hinges on the door.
There was no way that us, or I guess the Weather Service, could ever have predicted that it would have been the day that it turned out to be.
It was a day that will forever be remembered by those who survived it. Kenny Hallmark, the Hackleburg police chief, took his family to the police station where he thought they'd be the safest. Then he got the call on the radio.
And then I hear over the radio that the police department's been blown away and they can't find my family. And so it was a rough day at that point.
And to know that they may have perished because of that, I don't have any words that I could tell you how I felt at that point.
Fortunately, his family decided to stay with other family at their underground shelter, but even then, narrowly surviving.
My son and one of our friends, our family, Daryl Colburn, who is a council member now, they were having to hold that door, and they were having to hold so tight that the hinges broke from the tornado trying to suck it out.
The storm rampaged through the valley for 132 miles, leaving terrifying stories and close calls in its wake.
Or what, but I just know it was loud roar.
And a lot of, like you said, a lot of pressure. It seemed like a lot of pressure on your ears.
Like many, the Carters lost their home that day. Since then, the Carters and many around the valley have slowly recovered.
Next morning, we just started trying to see what we had to do to get things going to continue living. So.
And we struggle for some time.
Just keep pressing forward.
The neighborhood is coming back, but we've still lost a lot of homes.
5 years later, there are new homes, new stores, and there are new people. But the physical and mental scars from that day remain the same.
It's tough when they lose a loved one like that. It's sad.
It's still hard to deal with it. As this day approaches every year, they still have a lot, it's hard to deal with.
Victims hope April 27, 2011 stays in the minds of everyone in the Tennessee Valley to remember how serious storms can be.
Some people get tired of hearing about the tornadoes every year, but it becomes a point where if you don't do that, people lose sight of what actually happened and the magnitude of what can happen with tornadoes.
I'm more nervous now than I was before. And you know, when they say a tornado watch is in effect for your area, we always knew to watch out and take care and be weather aware.
Meteorologist Will Harkins, WAAY 31, Hometown News.
We have much more to come here in this special edition of WAAY 31 Hometown News. April's fury, 5 years later.
Started hearing about just.
That'll get better, I have to say. The WAAY 31 Storm Force weather team exclusively sits down with Governor Robert Bentley to find out if we're prepared just in case something this devastating happens again. Details when we return. On April 27, 2011, Governor Robert Bentley marked his 100th day in office. That day would also be one of the most memorable and trying in his term. Meteorologist Heather Mathis has an exclusive sit-down interview with Governor Bentley, where he describes his emotions during the tornado outbreak and what the state is still dealing with 5 years later.
I just wanted to talk with you about your experience with that devastation that happened. And it's my understanding you were actually only governor for a very short time before that happened. Is that right?
It was my 100th day in office. You know, a lot of times administrations are always looked at 100 days after they're in office, and this was our 100th day in office. And you know, it was a very difficult day.
How did we handle it, the state of Alabama, at a state level to make sure we were prepared going into that day?
We actually were as prepared as you could be. We did not know how severe it was going to be, but our EMA, we had things in place, you know, immediately we declared a state of emergency after things began to hit. But we were as prepared as you could be for such a devastating natural disaster, the worst that's ever hit the state of Alabama.
What was it like for you as governor when you started hearing about just how bad it was?
It was a very difficult, emotional day, and we had to make a lot of tough decisions during that day. You know, the first few hours after something like that hits, it's more of a search and rescue situation. And also, because it lasted the entire day, we were trying to warn people of impending dangers as the tornadoes went across the state. I had to come to Montgomery from Clanton. I had to come down here to be on television. I had a press conference at about 6 o'clock. Well, the tornado hit just as I was arriving. And I did not know at that time whether or not my children were safe. They were in Tuscaloosa. Whether or not my home that was there in Tuscaloosa had been destroyed.
How did you go on camera and be the governor when you didn't know?
You just have to do that. You know, we go through difficult times and you have to make difficult decisions as governor, and you just have to do that. And so that's what I did.
What would you say was the most memorable thing that you might have seen or heard when you were out and saw the devastation?
I think it's the difficulty in standing with a mother or a dad or a husband or a wife or a family member and consoling them and being there with them because they've lost somebody. They've lost a loved one. And it was almost like getting a post-traumatic stress situation. You know, I had heard it, I had seen it, I had heard it so many times that it was difficult. It was difficult for me to push through and to be with all of those people. I know there was an article that came out in, I think it was in Sports Illustrated. There was an article that talked about a mother who the next day went and searched, her daughter had been killed, and so she went and searched the debris of the house, and she found a dress that she wanted her daughter to be buried in. And as I was reading that story, I just had to stop because I had heard it and I'd seen it. And when I started reading that story, because I had lived all of this with all of these people, you know, this was a couple of weeks later. And I started reading that story and I just couldn't read it. And it was just difficult. It was difficult to do that.
People at home would be surprised to hear it's still, you know, 5 years after the event, something that's being worked on at a state level.
Long-term recovery is certainly that. It is long-term. We're still raising money for that to try to help the people that still maybe owe money or not able to recover. So we're still working on that.
North Alabama is now home to one of the most advanced severe weather research facilities, in a large part thanks to Governor Bentley's efforts for more research after the outbreak. The Severe Weather Institute and Radar Lightning Laboratory, or SWIRL, is located at the University of Alabama, Huntsville, with a goal of better understanding severe weather here in the Tennessee Valley. It was built on a state grant of $7 million. SWIRL is currently home to a multi-organization project called Vortex Southeast, where schools and researchers are coming together to study the unique storms like the ones that occurred on April 27th. Now, Vortex Southeast hopes to find how the terrain, Gulf moisture, warm temperatures, as well as other aspects of the atmosphere affecting the growth of severe weather here in the Tennessee Valley compared to the rest of the country.
You also get lots more high precipitation events.
and you get a lot more tornadoes in QLCSs than you do on the plains. It's very important to learn these differences so we can document them, and it gives forecasters a better chance to determine what's going to happen.
Vortex Southeast will be here until the end of May, where their headquarters is located at the University of Alabama, Huntsville. Much more to come here as we continue to look at April's Fury 5 years later. How has the National Weather Service watches and warnings changed in the last 5 years, and how emergency crews are making sure they stay prepared? That and more when we return. After the storms ripped through the Tennessee Valley and the tornado threat was done, work was just beginning for first responders. Meteorologist Liz Cosgrove talks with emergency managers and Huntsville Hospital about the challenges of handling a disaster of this magnitude.
It's a day of despair. It's a day of community coming together for a common good.
Tracy Daughtry with Huntsville Hospital vividly remembers the chaos of April 27, 2011.
Physicians were showing up from home, nurses came in that were off.
The hospital not only took people in who were injured and killed from across the Tennessee Valley, but sent extra doctors and nurses across the state to help out with other hard-hit areas.
But the main thing that kind of stuck out to me is that, you know, barriers that normally exist in our community kind of came down.
After the storm, hospital officials took a hard look at how their trauma unit handled the event.
Just kind of brainstormed, you know, what went well and what didn't go quite so well and what can we improve on. Things that came out of that was we bought 90 new mobile two-way radios.
Communication was also a big problem for emergency managers in the days after April 27th.
We had the challenges of losing telephone and internet for a while, but we did have backups in place and were able to get those backups quickly up and running.
Scott Worsham with the Madison County Emergency Management Association says command centers help get the word out on where first responders needed to go.
You had to open up a place for them to come in, get a safety briefing and an assignment as to where to go. All of that we quickly had to organize.
So how can we better prepare going forward? Both Daughtry and Worsham say their organizations have new policies in place after seeing just how bad an event of this magnitude can be.
So we do moulage, which is painting people up like they're injured with stuff sticking out of them. So we do live drills now with patients going through the process, actually going to CT scan and not just talk through it.
Our changes primarily been focused on lessening the impacts. For instance, adding more generators at critical facilities, fire stations, and other locations that must stay running in the event of severe weather.
Another organization changing their policies after the outbreak is the National Weather Service. Meteorologists are trying to better how they get their warnings out to the public. The National Weather Service has expanded its presence on social media in an effort to reach more people. Additionally, they've altered how they even word the warnings, called impact-based warnings. All of this is a direct result of the April 27th outbreak, and the hope is to save more lives.
Since 2011, in 5 years, we've learned that the way we word our messages need to be differently. It helps people understand to take different actions if we're saying a tornado's on the ground or a large tornado's on the ground, as opposed to just radar has detected a tornado.
The Huntsville National Weather Service is actually a test bed for expansion into Instagram. Additionally, their research has shown the impact-based warnings help convey the seriousness of storms. Research has also been found that one of the reasons for the high death toll during the outbreak was the lack of adequate shelter. Sheltering in the most interior room of your domicile will frequently protect you against the most brutal storms, but the intensity of the storms on April 27th was more than what most buildings can handle. And the outcry for community shelters was great through federal grants. Now, many communities were able to get community shelters that can house anywhere between 40 to 200 people.
It gives me a lot of security, you know, I mean, I can come 2 miles and get in a safe place.
I think it's good to know that you got a place to go that can be safe, you know. Like I said, there's so many people that live in mobile homes, that's just a death trap.
The Storm Force Weather Team has also compiled a list of tornado shelters across the entire Tennessee Valley. It's up right now under our severe weather guide at WAAYTV.com. When we return, I'm sitting down with the rest of the WAAY 31 Storm Force weather team to talk about what we've learned in recent years and how we're dedicated to keeping you and your family safe. Thanks again for joining us. When all the power was cut out across the Tennessee Valley, one of the true ways of actually getting any warnings at all was one of the services that we provide called Weather Call.
Weather Call is an app that you sign up for that will alert you of when a tornado warning or a severe thunderstorm warning is only in your area.
It's based on the storm, not by the county. Not only do we have that up at WAAYTV.com, we also have our entire severe weather guide, which is good not only for severe weather, but weather of any kind.
And it was also a remarkable day. It had actually 340,000 calls out to everybody. But I want to thank everyone for joining us for this evening, and I hope everyone has an excellent night.